Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive veteran refuses to sell his remote mountain cabin, he sparks a ruthless war with a corrupt HOA queenpin and her enforcer husband. But they picked the wrong man to threaten because this land hides more than just trees. It hides a fighter who won't back down. The wind in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains has a way of speaking to you when you've lived long enough in silence. Some days it whispers. Some days it screams. That morning, it was quiet, almost reverent, as if even the air respected my routine. I was splitting wood by the side of the cabin, half listening to the soft creak of pine trees and the rhythmic crunch of my boots on the frost-hardened dirt. The axe bit into the log with the kind of efficiency that only comes from repetition and necessity. No performance, just survival. I didn't hear her at first. The sound of tires on gravel was too soft, almost dainty. Not the usual rumble of hikers or tourists who sometimes got lost and ended up near my property. When I looked up, she was already halfway up my trail, a tall woman in a pressed red blazer, hiking boots that had never seen a real trail, and that particular breed of overconfidence exclusive to HOA presidents. She stopped right at the edge of my gate, the wooden one I built myself with the words "private property" carved in bold letters across it, and tilted her sunglasses down to look at me like I was something she'd stepped in. "You're Matt Donovan, right?" she asked, as if the answer wasn't obvious. I nodded once, leaned on the axe, and waited. She didn't bother with introductions. "I'm here about your cabin." Of course she was. She glanced around like she was inspecting a run-down tool shed. "This place? It's going to be a problem. You're sitting on prime elevation. Views, forest access, no HOA oversight. We could develop the hell out of this." I didn't say a word. "I'm expanding Mountain Crest Estates. You're smack in the middle of the grid. So, name your price." "Let's make this painless." I stepped forward, just enough to make her take half a step back. "Not for sale." "Everything's for sale," she said with a thin smile. "We're offering cash. Fast closing. You could buy yourself 3 more cabins just like this, somewhere flatter." I shook my head. This land was deeded to me by a man who died owing no one anything. It's not up for discussion. That's when her smile vanished. Her voice turned sharp. "We will get this land, Mr. Donovan. One way or another. I suggest you reconsider." I stayed silent. She turned on her heel and marched back to her car. Some imported SUV, spotless, way too clean for mountain roads. Tires spun a bit in the gravel as she pulled away, but not before rolling her window down to bark, "You'll hear from us soon." I exhaled slowly, rolled my neck, and looked out over the valley. The sun was just peeking over the ridgeline, casting gold over the treetops. I knew this wouldn't be the last visit. The ones like her, they never take no for an answer. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent most of my adult life dealing with people who thought force or money gave them power, and I was still standing. That evening, I installed 2 new motion-activated cameras at the edge of the trail. Not because I was scared, because I like knowing when the wind's about to shift. I figured that would be it, at least for a few days. The kind of woman who drops ultimatum in full makeup at 7,000 feet usually needs a break to recalibrate her strategy. I didn't expect the next move to come the following morning. And I sure as hell didn't expect it to come in the form of 6.5 feet of testosterone, chewing gum like it owed him money. I was fixing a leak in the pipe that ran from the spring-fed tank behind the cabin when I heard the deep grumble of a V8 engine coming up the trail. The sound bounced between the trees like an approaching storm. When I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, I saw him, a tank of a man stepping out of a lifted black SUV that looked like it came straight out of a demolition derby with chrome accents. Aviators, tight athletic shirt, hands the size of dinner plates. I didn't need introductions. That had to be her husband. The infamous Tank. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Just stood there, arms folded like a bouncer outside a bar, sizing me up like I was a lightweight. "So, you're the guy who thinks he's bigger than the HOA, he said, his voice a low rumble. "Cute setup you got here. Quiet, secluded. Would be a shame if something happened to it." I didn't answer. Not yet. I just watched him. Watched how he scanned the tree line, the roof, the propane tank beside the shed. He was performing. A thug in a polo shirt trying to play mob boss. Problem was, I'd seen real intimidation before. This was a high school drama audition. He took a step forward, boots crunching on gravel. "Listen, my wife's got a vision. That means you either get on board or get out of the way. I'm here to help you understand. That's still no answer." I took a sip from the metal thermos in my hand, stared him down, and finally said, "You're standing on private property. And you're not invited." He smiled, took another step. "Come on, man. Don't be that guy. Just say a number. 1 million? 2? Hell, we'll even cover the closing costs." I set down the thermos slowly and stepped forward till there were maybe 3 feet between us. "You've got 5 seconds to turn around, get in your toy truck, and drive back to HOA land." His smile faltered just a bit. He didn't like being talked down to, especially by someone not impressed by his bulk. He moved in close, real close, and jabbed a thick finger at my chest. "You're gonna regret this. People who cross Karen don't get second chances." Then his hand moved fast, grabbed the collar of my flannel shirt, and yanked. Sloppy. Telegraphed. I let him have the first move, just long enough for him to commit. In less than 3 seconds, I had his wrist locked, his center of gravity broken, and his massive frame slammed down into the gravel with a satisfying thud. His breath left him in a hard grunt, and his sunglasses flew off into the brush. I didn't hit him, didn't need to. I just stood over him, one boot lightly pressing his wrist to the dirt. "Next time you touch me," I said calmly, "it's going to end worse." Much worse, he didn't say anything, just stared at me with eyes full of confused rage and something else, humiliation, the kind of look a man wears when the reality doesn't match the movie in his head, when brute strength meets experience. I let him go, turned my back on him, and walked toward the cabin. He got up slow. I heard him spit, then mutter something under his breath. "You think you're tough. We'll see how tough you are when you're in court, asshole." I didn't look back, just called over my shoulder, "Try it." He got in his SUV, tires screeching as he backed up the trail, gravel spraying. When the dust finally settled, I stood there a moment longer, breathing slow. Then I walked inside, pulled the footage from the camera mounted to the porch beam, and saved every second of it to 3 separate drives. Let them try the legal route. I'd fought in countries that didn't even have courts. I was ready. The warning shot was fired. Metaphorically, of course. I wasn't the one who needed to make threats. That's what people like Tank and Karen never understood. When you've spent years in places where threats come with roadside bombs or snipers, a meathead in a Tahoe and his high-strung wife barely register, but I knew their kind. They didn't lose well. And when force failed, they always turned to something more insidious: paperwork. It started with a letter stuffed into my mailbox without a stamp. The HOA's letterhead looked official enough, probably printed on Karen's home office printer. Inside, it accused me of unlawful construction on restricted land, citing imaginary county ordinances and a supposed easement dispute. I read it over while sipping coffee, then placed it neatly into the burn barrel out back, but I didn't ignore it. I scanned the original and forwarded it to Tom Winslow, my lawyer and an old friend from the 10th Mountain Division. Tom specialized in land disputes and had a particular fondness for crushing suburban tyranny. 2 days later, a deputy from the county sheriff's office drove up the trail. Not one I recognized, a new guy, too young to be cynical yet, but already carrying that departmental stiffness. He stepped out, rested his hand on his belt, and said, "Afternoon, sir. I'm responding to a complaint filed by Mountain Crest Estates HOAI motion to the porch. Coffee? Or is this a stand-and-talk kind of visit?" He declined the drink, but accepted a seat. I watched him glance around the property like he was trying to decide if it was a meth lab or a militia compound. I handed him a manila folder. Inside, notarized deed transfer from Harold Jenkins to me, with GPS coordinates that matched county records, certified zoning maps, permits for the solar array and graywater system, and my last property tax receipts. He thumbed through the documents slowly. "They said you were building without permits." "I haven't built a damn thing," I said. "The cabin's been here since '89. Only thing I've added is rain catchment and peace and quiet." He looked uneasy. "They also mentioned weapons. Said you've been firing guns within range of their homes." I pointed to the laminated sign nailed to the inside wall of the porch. "No discharge zone. Compliant. A carryover from when Harold used to teach basic marksmanship here for search and rescue teams. Haven't fired a shot since I moved in. But I do have cameras, and you're welcome to see them. He hesitated, then nodded. We stepped inside. I pulled up the camera feed archive, motion-activated recordings from all directions with timestamps. Together, we watched Tank storm the property. We watched him grab me. We watched me calmly put him on the ground. No knives, no threats, no guns. Just pure, boring self-defense. The deputy whistled. Well, that's not what they said happened. No, I said. It rarely is. He took a copy of the footage and promised to file a supplemental report. Before leaving, he turned back to me. Between you and me, they're making a lot of noise down there, trying to push this up the chain. I'd keep a paper trail. If I were you, I already had a binder filling up. That evening, I got a call from Tom. He'd pulled HOA filings from the county registrar's office. Turns out, the complaint wasn't even formally approved by the HOA board. It was submitted solely under Karen's signature. Illegal, invalid, and extremely interesting. Then came the social media blitz. Someone, I wonder who, posted on the Mountain Crest Estates Facebook group, "Dangerous man in the mountains. Armed, hostile, lives like a hermit. Threat to our community." It was attached to a blurry, zoomed-in screenshot from one of their phones showing me carrying firewood with my old Glock on my hip, legal, holstered, on my own land. Normally, I wouldn't care. But a few of the comments hit a nerve. Should call CPS. I heard he has kids up there. False. He's one of those prepper types. Bet he has bunkers. Ridiculous, but not funny when you're dealing with paranoid neighbors. So I posted once. Just once. A clean, quiet video of the encounter with Tank. No commentary, no editing, just the facts. With it, I added, I live alone. I pay my taxes. I protect my land. And I don't tolerate threats. The post spread faster than wildfire in dry season. Within a day, it had hundreds of comments. Turns out not everyone in Mountain Crest liked Karen. A few even messaged me privately, saying they were tired of her antics and wished I'd press charges. I didn't answer those messages. I wasn't ready to go nuclear, not yet, but the fuse had definitely been lit. 3 nights later, I caught the first sign that things were about to get louder, literally. Around 11:30, just as I was finishing a chapter of an old paperback by lantern light, the silence outside cracked open with the faint crunch of gravel under slow-moving tires. My hand instinctively went to the remote for the exterior floodlights. I didn't turn them on right away. I waited, watching the monitors. The camera feed lit up in grayscale. A convoy of 3 vehicles had pulled up just past the outer tree line. Not on my property, but damn close. One of them was that same chromed-out monster Tank drove. The others were black SUVs, private security types. You could spot the posture through the windows. Wide stances, earpieces, matching polos. HOA muscle. I flipped the floodlights on. A wave of blinding white light swept across the trees like a searchlight across a prison yard. One of the SUVs backed up a foot in surprise, and I caught a flash of Karen's blonde hair through the windshield as she shielded her face with a clipboard. They thought they'd come in unseen. They were wrong. I didn't go out right away. Let them sit. Let them sweat. Instead, I made a call, direct line to Sheriff's Dispatch. I gave them the time, coordinates, and explained the pattern. Prior assault by Tank, false HOA filings, and now what looked like intimidation with private guards. The dispatcher promised to send a deputy, though they were stretched thin tonight. I knew what that meant. Expect delays. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, floodlights still humming. 2 men I didn't recognize were now outside one of the SUVs, standing just off the gravel, half in the woods, like they were waiting for something. I recognized the body language. Mercenary types. Not soldiers. Not law enforcement. Just rent-a-bulldogs who took one too many weekend seminars on presence. Karen was the first to speak, yelling from behind her open car door like a general leading a charge she wouldn't personally fight. This is your last chance, Donovan. We came to negotiate. I stopped at the edge of the porch and replied, loud and even, "You're trespassing. We're on community property." "No," I said. "You're 53 feet into private land. GPS logged. Cameras rolling. Audio recorded." Tank stepped forward now, jacket open, trying to look casual. "Let's talk like men, Matt. No need to bring the law into it. You did that when you filed false reports." One of the guards flinched, like he wasn't fully briefed on the backstory. The other tapped something on his earpiece. Karen, visibly agitated, waved a clipboard like it was a holy relic. "I have an updated plat map here. This land is within HOA jurisdiction that got a laugh out of me. Did you draw it in crayon? They didn't like that." Tank suddenly surged forward, fast and low, like he was going to charge the steps. But before he got halfway, two figures stepped out of the shadows behind me. Mike and Curtis, my old army buddies who'd come to visit for the week. Both of them were holding aluminum bats resting against their shoulders like casual suggestions. Neither said a word. They didn't have to. Tank stopped mid-stride. One of the guards put a hand on his chest. Karen screamed, "This is harassment! I'll have you arrested." I took a step forward, staying calm. "You brought 3 vehicles, 4 men, and a falsified map to my home after dark. That's not negotiation, that's attempted coercion. You've been recorded on 5 separate devices, and I suggest you leave before the sheriff's department adds trespassing and intimidation to your list of problems." One of the guards mumbled something to the others. Then, just like that, the momentum shifted. Tank backed off. Karen was still yelling, but her voice had lost that smug, razor-sharp tone. She sounded shrill now, desperate. Her army was retreating. They piled back into their SUVs. The engines fired up, tires spun, and within a minute, the headlights disappeared back down the trail. But not before Karen screamed out her final act of defiance from the window. "This isn't over. I'll burn that shack to the ground if I have to." Mike chuckled. Did she just threaten arson? On tape. "Yup," I said. Curtis looked at me. Deadpan. "We writing that one down?" "Already flagged it." I nodded, holding up my phone. Audio backed up to the cloud. 15 minutes later, a deputy finally arrived. We showed him the footage. He watched the whole thing, arms folded, jaw tight. "I'll file the report," he said. But between you and me, this HOA's heading for a legal collapse. Fast good. Let them collapse. I wasn't going anywhere. It was the 3rd morning after the night raid when the envelope appeared on my porch. No postmark, no return address. Just my name, scribbled in block letters across the front, like a ransom note. I picked it up carefully, half expecting it to be laced with glitter or spite. Instead, it held something far more volatile. Numbers. Inside were 5 printed pages. Bank transfers, line items, HOA budget summaries with red circles drawn around totals. Most of it meant little without context, but the highlighted accounts caught my eye. Names that didn't match any local vendors, payments listed as community infrastructure improvements, each one routed through the same shell company, Evergreen. Vista Development, LLC, a company I'd never heard of. A company registered in Nevada. I stood on the porch for a long moment, scanning each page twice. Then, as if summoned by a curse, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked up without speaking. A woman's voice, hushed and nervous. "Did you get the envelope?" "Who is this?" "I used to work for the HOA. Karen fired me last month. I was the bookkeeper. I went still." "Why are you contacting me?" "Because you need to know the truth. They're not trying to buy your land to expand the HOA. They needed to cover their tracks." She told me her name was Linda Marks. Said she'd been handling the books for Mountain Crest for 2 years. At first, it was little things. Inflated maintenance charges, mileage reimbursements that made no sense. But over time, she started seeing deeper patterns, recurring payments to the same company, supposedly for landscaping, road repaving, snow plowing, all services that were never performed. When I brought it up, Karen told me to shut up and shred, her words. Then she had her husband threaten me in the parking lot. I didn't doubt it. I asked if she'd go on record. She hesitated. "I'll give you everything I have, but I won't be the one testifying. Not unless I have protection." I agreed to meet her. Public place, broad daylight, neutral ground. She picked a coffee shop down in Westcliff. I brought a small recorder and my lawyer, Tom. Linda showed up wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a laptop. Nervous, but solid. We sat in a back booth, and for the next hour, she laid it all out. Karen and Tank had been funneling HOA money through fake contractors for over a year. The plan was simple. Use the HOA's capital to fund Evergreen Vista, then buy out nearby properties under the radar. The last piece was my land, the crown jewel. They'd planned to demolish the cabin, subdivide the lot, and flip it through Evergreen Vista for 10 times the original value. I sat there, not saying much, just listening as she clicked through folder after folder of invoices, email chains, fake meeting minutes, and falsified board approvals. It was all there, the kind of evidence that made investigators salivate. Tom leaned in. "You okay with handing this off to the county?" Linda nodded. "Yes, but not to local law enforcement. Karen's brother works dispatch." Of course he did. Tom made a call to his contact at the Colorado State Attorney General's office. The words possible RICO predicate behavior were used. That got their attention. We uploaded copies of all files to a secure drive and prepared an official submission. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, things were heating up. Literally. Someone had slashed the propane line to my backup generator. No spark, no explosion, thank God. But the leak could have turned deadly fast. Luckily, I smelled it early. I filed a report with the sheriff's office. Again. And then came the cherry on top. Karen, in her infinite arrogance, posted a message to the Mountain Crest community Facebook page. Certain individuals in our area are attempting to sabotage progress and community growth with malicious lies. We are pursuing legal remedies and will expose these criminals soon. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. By that evening, half a dozen neighbors had contacted me privately. They wanted out. Some were horrified to learn where their HOA fees had gone. Others were just tired of being dragged into a war they didn't sign up for. Karen was losing control of the narrative, and for people like her, that's worse than losing money. But I wasn't done yet. Now I had the paper trail. Now I had motive. Now it was my turn to dig. It didn't take long for the fuse to reach the powder. 2 days after Linda turned over her files, the Colorado State Attorney General's office authorized an interagency investigation into the Mountain Crest Estates HOA. I wasn't privy to all the details, but Tom kept me in the loop. They were moving fast. Too fast for Karen to plug the leaks. It started quietly. Subpoenas, phone records, property transfer audits. Then came the search warrant. That morning, 2 black Suburbans and a marked sheriff's cruiser rolled up to the HOA's main office, a prefab building behind their community clubhouse with faux stone siding and fake columns meant to mimic wealth. From my ridge, I watched it unfold on the live stream from my drone, which I had hovering at legal altitude and recording everything. Agents entered with purpose. No guns drawn, just clipboards, gloves, and warrant folders thick with probable cause. Karen was there, of course, wearing sunglasses indoors, pacing like a CEO about to be ousted. Tank showed up 10 minutes later, already yelling at the deputies before he was out of the truck. I couldn't hear the words, but his body language said plenty. Red-faced, jab-fingered, swagger on fumes. Then, in a moment that I must have replayed 50 times later that night, an agent opened the office's side door and wheeled out 2 hard drives and a banker's box filled with binders, laptops, and a torn manila envelope with my name on it. That was when Karen snapped. She lunged at the agent, tried to grab the box, screaming, "That's private! You can't take that!" She was restrained, not arrested yet. But it was over. The dam had cracked, and the water was rising. Hours later, I got a call from a name I didn't expect, Deputy Sanchez, the same new guy who'd come up weeks ago for the false gun complaint. He sounded tense. "Matt, you might want to come down to the station. There's something you need to see." I drove down the mountain, a quiet ride, nerves calm but alert. Inside the sheriff's office, Sanchez led me to a back room and laid out a series of printed maps on the table. Survey overlays, plat records. But something was off. There were 2 versions of the same area. One official, stamped by the county, and one that showed my property divided in half with the line redrawn to loop it into the HOA's zoning boundaries. "She submitted this version to the zoning board," Sanchez said, tapping the forged map. "Claimed your cabin was built illegally on common access land. Used this as part of a permit request for demolition." I stared at the map. The redraw was sloppy, almost lazy. The GPS markers didn't even line up with the satellite data. They'd tried to move the world by dragging a mouse and clicking, save Sanchez flipped another page. Here's the kicker. She got a backdated notary seal. "From her cousin in Denver, forgery," I said. "Several counts. And if they find she used this to try to move title or request zoning changes, that's criminal intent." I signed a sworn affidavit. Tom sent an emergency filing to the district court requesting a declaratory judgment to confirm boundary legitimacy and block any fraudulent transfers. The court granted a temporary injunction within 48 hours. Meanwhile, the investigation into the HOA was exploding. They found expense reports for non-existent contractors, emails referencing off-the-books bonuses, internal chat logs where Karen bragged about how the cabin will be ours soon enough. I knew the net was closing, but what I didn't expect, what I didn't see coming, was the final act of desperation. Late that evening, after dinner, the motion lights on the Western Trail snapped on. At first I thought it might be a deer or a neighbor, but the figure that moved across the camera feed wasn't an animal. It was Tank. He was alone. No SUV. No guards. Just him. A duffel slung over his shoulder, stumbling like a man halfway between drunk and desperate. He ignored the signs past 3 no trespassing markers and walked right up to the cabin gate. He didn't say a word, just stood there. I stepped outside, the dogs barking from inside the cabin. I didn't have a weapon visible, but I didn't need one. He looked up at me like a man whose world had shrunk too fast. "I just wanted to win," he said. "She said it would fix everything." I didn't answer. He dropped the bag at his feet. It landed with a metallic clunk. I stepped closer carefully and opened it. Inside, paperwork, HOA documents, USB drives, the missing ledger. A hard copy of the forged map, complete with handwritten edits in Karen's handwriting. He looked at me, hollow. "I'm done lying for her." And then he walked away into the night. The grand jury moved faster than I thought it would. Maybe it was the media pressure. The local paper had run a front-page spread titled "From HOA to RICO. Shocking Allegations Rock Mountain Crest Estates." Maybe it was the sheer volume of evidence. Or maybe it was just the universe finally punching back. Either way, the indictments dropped within 10 days of Tank's late-night surrender. Karen Lovell charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, forgery of public documents, abuse of HOA authority, and attempted unlawful seizure of private property. Her husband, listed under his real name, Nathaniel Lovell, faced accessory charges, criminal intimidation, and obstruction. 23 total counts between them. And the cherry on top, the state froze Evergreen Vista Development's accounts and labeled the entire HOA as under forensic audit, meaning their operations were suspended pending further review. HOA meetings were canceled. The board resigned en masse within 48 hours. No one wanted to be the last one standing when the music stopped. I got my court summons 2 weeks later, not as a defendant, but as a primary witness. Tom prepped me for the testimony, walking me through every document, every date, every pixel of footage we had. We didn't have to embellish. The truth was damning enough. The courthouse was packed, news vans outside. Karen showed up in a beige pantsuit like she was attending a real estate seminar, not a felony hearing. She kept her head high, but I saw it. The twitch in her jaw, the way her fingers flexed constantly. Tank didn't make eye contact with anyone. He looked like a linebacker who knew the next snap was going to be his last. I was called on day 2. I walked to the stand in boots and a clean shirt. Nothing fancy. I looked the jury in the eye, one by one. Then I told them everything. From the first visit where Karen tried to buy me out like a piece of roadside fruit, to Tank grabbing my collar, to the forged documents and midnight intimidation runs. I described the propane line being cut, the doctored maps, the Facebook smear campaign. I showed them the map overlays, the drone footage, the notarized documents. Then I handed over the duffel bag. The prosecutor unzipped it slowly, like it was radioactive, and pulled out each piece. The room fell dead silent when they saw the original forged zoning map with Karen's handwriting on it. Edits, arrows, a sticky note that read, "Make sure county clerk only sees this copy." Then came the USB drive. The prosecutor queued it up on a monitor. It played a screen recording, Karen's desktop with an email open. She was explaining to a contractor how to overstate project costs to pad Evergreen Vista's account. The timestamp matched one day after the HOA voted on a new security lighting budget. The defense had nothing. They didn't even call Karen to the stand. Tank, to his credit, pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. His statement was short but clear. "I let my wife convince me that intimidation was business." I was wrong, Karen. She didn't say a word. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. Guilty. On all counts. The judge didn't waste time. Karen got 18 years, no parole for the first 10. Tank got 7. Evergreen Vista was dissolved. Assets seized. A restitution fund was created. Every dollar they skimmed from residents was to be returned. The HOA was disbanded by court order. My land was affirmed in the final judgment as individually owned, immune to annexation, and record corrected at the county level to prevent future attempts at reclassification. In short, they couldn't touch it again. Ever. I walked out of that courthouse into crisp mountain air, my boots hitting pavement like war drums. A couple of neighbors, people I'd barely spoken to before, nodded as I passed. One of them said, "Thank you." I didn't answer. Just tipped my hat and kept walking. I wasn't their hero. I was just the man who told them no, and meant it. The mountains didn't change. Even after the headlines faded, after the last court hearing closed, after the last check was cut from the restitution fund, the Sangre de Cristo Range stood as it always had, cold, tall, indifferent. That was part of why I lived here. The peaks didn't care about HOA drama or forged documents. They didn't blink when people lied or when justice showed up in a black SUV with a search warrant. The mountains watched everything but judged nothing. I liked that. It had been 3 months since the trial, long enough for the dust to settle, for the news vans to find something fresher to chase, for the remaining residents of Mountain Crest to form a new interim board and start the long, painful process of rebuilding what Karen had poisoned. A few even reached out to me, letters in envelopes with real stamps and handwritten apologies. Some said they had no idea what was going on. Others admitted they'd been too afraid to speak up. One woman offered me a pie and a handshake. I accepted the pie. The cabin had survived, but just barely. The legal storm had taken its toll. A few of the window frames had been warped from the sudden drop in temperature. During the week, the power had gone out, and the generator needed a complete overhaul. The roof had held up, but the gutters were torn half loose from when Tank and his private goons stomped around like they were clearing an embassy. Still, nothing that couldn't be fixed with a few weekends of sweat and a truckload of lumber. I'd spent the better part of October repairing things with my own hands. No contractors, no permits, just me, my tools, and the quiet satisfaction of building something the right way. Again. I installed new solar panels, repaired the porch steps, replaced the propane lines. I even added a set of metal reinforced gates at the bottom of the trail, wide enough to let through a ranger's truck, but tall enough to keep out busybodies with clipboards. Above the new gate, welded into a clean sheet of steel, I mounted a custom sign. Not fancy, just honest. Private property. Entry forbidden by court order. It was the last word in a conversation I never wanted to have again. Curtis and Mike came back around Thanksgiving. We smoked a turkey outside over cedar logs and passed a bottle of Highland Scotch around like old men reliving old days, which, let's be honest, we were. Curtis had retired to Arizona, couldn't stand the snow anymore. Mike still lived out in Nebraska, worked with a veterans outreach nonprofit, but they made time to check in. Said they wanted to see the famous shack that beat a multi-million-dollar scam. They brought gifts. A brass plaque with the words "Never Bluffed, Never Folded," and a battered copy of The Art of War with a post-it note that read Matt's HOA. Survival Manual. I mounted the plaque above the mantel, left the book on the coffee table. Still haven't opened it. After dinner, we sat outside under a sky so clear you could see the entire Milky Way like a brushstroke across black velvet. The fire popped softly. Snow had just started to fall, light and dry, hissing as it hit the cast iron stoveplate I'd repurposed as a fire ring. Curtis leaned back and asked, "So what now?" I shrugged. Same as before. Live quiet. Sleep deep. Stay out of town if I can help it. Mike smirked. You ever think about selling this place? Now that it's famous and all, I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They knew. We sat in silence for a while, not the awkward kind. The good kind. The kind that comes only when you've earned peace through fire. The kind you can only share with people who've seen the worst in the world and still come back to fix a fence instead of burn it down. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail from the county. It was short and to the point. The district judge had signed off on a permanent protective designation for my parcel. No HOA, no annexation, no rezoning. The property line was now locked in court records, in GPS databases, and in 3 separate state repositories. It might as well have been chiseled into granite. I folded the letter and placed it in a fireproof safe behind the old wood stove, right next to Harold's will and the deed transfer that started this whole mess. Every so often, I still get hikers who wander a little too far off the trail and come up my way. Most are polite. Some get curious. A few ask if I'm that guy from the news. I tell them I am, but only when I feel like talking. A few weeks ago, a family passed through. Mother, father, 2 kids looking for wildflowers. They'd rented a cabin nearby, not realizing it was once managed by Evergreen Vista. The father asked if they were trespassing. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said, "but one more step that way, and you'll meet the business end of a county line." We laughed. I gave the kids some hot cocoa and pointed them toward the lower ridge where the fireweeds still bloomed in the winter sun. Later that evening, I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the last orange light disappear behind the peaks. The cold crept in like a whisper, but the cabin held it off. Sturdy, warm, alive. Somewhere out there, Karen was trading beige pantsuits for a jumpsuit with numbers on the chest. Tank was probably doing push-ups in a county facility, trying to reclaim a fraction of his pride. The HOA no longer existed, just a memory of what happens when greed gets too loud and meets someone willing to say no, and me. I was still here, still standing, still home.